Hello, my name is Samaya Nadrali, and I'm a senior consultant at Euroconsult. I'd like to welcome you to today's discussion focused on adapting to evolving market dynamics in the satellite industry, which is part of the GSAW webinar series in association with Connectivity Business News. Today, we are joined by esteemed panelists Will Mudge, Vice President of Global Infrastructure at Speedcast, Stephen Conley, Director of Platform Strategy and Maritime Product Management at Eutelsat, Ronald Vander Brean, Chief Commercial Officer at Rivada Space Networks, and Cynthia Hardy, Senior Vice President of Corporate Strategy at ST Engineering iDirect. This session will focus on the competitive landscape and key structural drivers causing adaptation and involvement in the satellite industry. The satellite industry has seen a change in the competitive landscape and continues to evolve. Some of the key structural drivers over the past few years include the emergence of multi-orbit strategies, the momentum in NGSO capacity, the presence of software-defined satellites, and inorganic growth through a variety of measures, including vertical integration and horizontal consolidation. Global operators are deploying large multi-orbit constellations to leverage the advantages of different orbits. NGSO is dominating in total supply and is projected to represent 96% of the total global supply by 2032, with Starlink as a major driver of this growth. Software-defined satellites have gained prominence, evolving the growth of satellite connectivity in mobility markets. On the user terminal side, flat panel antennas are expected to be a key enabler for the larger adoption of NGSO connectivity. So without further ado, we'll start off by having each of the panelists introduce themselves and the companies they represent. I'll pass it off to you, Will, to kick it off.
Okay, great, thank you. So my name is Will Mudge. I'm the Vice President of Global Infrastructure at Speedcast. Speedcast is a managed service provider, so we take services from Starlink or OneWeb or Intelsat or Eutelsat or Rivada whenever Rivada's network is running. And we integrate them together for solutions for our end customers. So I think the topic is really salient for us. We bring that end user perspective to the discussion.
Great, thanks. Ronald, did you want to go next?
Sure. Ron Vander Brean, I head of the commercial department as Chief Commercial Officer for Rivada Space Networks. I have a history in telecommunications as well as satellites for a long time. And working for Rivada is very exciting because it's a different type of constellation, offering end-to-end services that are secure, very low latency, and allowing businesses and enterprises to connect networks and offices in a way that was never possible before, neither terrestrially nor through satellite. So we're hoping to launch next year with a precursor mission, and then we're going to be going up with all the 300 that we are looking to launch initially, starting in 2025, and hope to be done in 2026 with that.
Great. Stephen?
Hi, Stephen Conley. I'm working for the Eutelsat Group, which is a combination of Eutelsat and the new OneWeb organization, which is a recent horizontal consolidation, I would say, in terms of what you mentioned earlier. So Eutelsat OneWeb have a connectivity business unit which focuses on the multi-constellation combination of GEO and LEO connectivity products. I work in the product development team, largely focused on mobility aspect, and have been in the industry around 20 years, working generally in the satellite operator field and satellite service provider field.
Thank you. And Cynthia?
Good morning. My name is Cynthia Hardy, and as referenced, I'm the Senior Vice President of Corporate Strategy for ST Engineering iDirect. Thank you for having us today. We're very interested in sharing ideas about the changes that are taking place in our collective marketplace. iDirect has been in the SATCOM industry for nearly 30 years, focused on the GEO satellite communications portion, with insights and directions to support NGSO. And we're anxious to share ideas today, not only with the panelists, but of course the questions that will be submitted later on.
Thank you, Cynthia. So the first topic of conversation is with regards to corporate strategy and differentiation. So what is your company's current strategy and what sets you apart from competing organizations in the industry? And perhaps in reverse order, we can start with you, Cynthia.
Sure, thanks. So our current strategy is to really focus on three main pillars. We all are experiencing in the industry tremendous disruption, innovation, and we have really centered our direction around focusing in on our operator and service provider customers, helping them operate their networks in the most efficient manner possible in order to deal with the competitive disruptions that are occurring. We also feel a key part of our strategy is adhering to standards, whether they be SATCOM standards or terrestrial standards, as we're seeing the convergence, the concept of interoperability becoming much more key for many of our customers. And last but not least is we also appreciate, and part of our strategy is that we will not be able to solve all of our customer requirements and needs. So we have a very concerted effort to work with ecosystem partners, whether that be at the application level, maybe it may be at a different deployment option, potentially cloud service provider, potentially other hardware providers that are delivering commercial off-the-shelf hardware to market. So really those three pillars we are building our go-forward strategy around, focusing on efficiency for our operator, our customers, working towards incorporating standards within our product offering, and expanding our ecosystem of partners that we work with in order to deliver optimized solutions to market.
Thank you for sharing. Ronald?
So like I mentioned before, we're planning on launching 300 satellites initially, ultimately 600 that will connect any 2 points on Earth in the fastest and most secure possible way. And for that to understand, we can talk hardware and we can talk gigabits and we can talk antennas and phased array and lasers and all that stuff, which is of course very interesting, and we can get into that as deep and as far as we want to. But in order to understand the real differentiator here, because that was the question, we need to take a step back. And that is that in satellite, but not really only in satellite, also in terrestrial networking, we're very focused on giving and providing access. So it's terrestrial also. I mean, we all have a cell phone in our hand. So when we talk about being connected in 5G and 4G, it's all about getting connected to the internet. It's not different in satellite. We have a long history as a function of being in space and looking down upon Earth and seeing a massive amount of landmass or sea or whatever is under the satellite, and have a unique position, like literally, to pick up traffic from far and remote places and get it into a gateway, and then as such be connected. And so while connections are extremely important and giving access is extremely important, and lots of companies have built their business models around that, once connected, it is connected into what? It is connected into terrestrial backbones. That can be subsea cables, they can be massive fiber constructions that we have across continents, but also metro fiber, but people often forget about that in terms of they assume it's there and they assume it's the only way of really transporting data from one far place on Earth to the other. Satellite has never really been concerned about, doing that in space. We've only been focusing on access. Rivada is focusing on both access and doing the long haul. Because if you start transporting data, not via subsea cables anymore, or very expensive cable systems that, Quest back in the day was laying alongside of railroad tracks and all of that. If you start doing that in space, First of all, you get an enormous latency advantage, which is very, very important to a very select group of people that are in the financial business, but also to, any and every type business that wants to run, for instance, an ERP application. Latency is everything. If you have too much latency, the whole thing breaks down. So there's a massive advantage doing that in space. And from a security perspective, well, I don't need to outline that how easy it is to put a shovel into a cable, or if you have worse intentions, to put your hands on patch panels and find your way into hacking into systems that way. That's virtually impossible in space. So Rivada is about both access, because that's inherent to being in satellite, but also about backbone, about carrying data the long haul. And in doing so, provide a unique opportunity for enterprises, governments, and other large organizations to have their data be carried around more secure and faster, allowing it to tap into more applications and get more problems solved than they can using any alternative satellite system and terrestrial system. So that, I think, is it's true for Rivada, and I think at the end of the day, it's also a great opportunity for the satellite market as a whole. Because again, coming back to what I started with, so far the focus has always been on providing access, and then once things were being connected into a gateway, that was basically the end of the satellite and the satellite system and the satellite industry. And that needs to change, and we're hoping to be the first one to do that. And we see a lot of customer traction because it seems to be a very compelling value proposition.
Then maybe
Thank
to
you.
build on that, Ronald, where Speedcast is we tie that together. Sorry, Samaya, I'm assuming you were going to me next. And build on that, right? Because like you said, the value of satellite as an operator is at that teleport edge, but we can take it further from that. And I think that's where Speedcasts come in. We have a lot of really great solutions that are coming around that will be here soon. Rivada, OneWeb, ST Engineering, all the products that we use to be able to bring a better experience to those customers. Right? Once you enable those applications, once you have those inter satellite links and you're able to provide all those great applications, how do you use it? Starlink's been fantastic. I don't think anyone can say otherwise. It's really been great to be able to get it onto the edge, but the thirst for bandwidth at the edge is still even beyond what Starlink can provide today. Right? We still have to find ways to be able to either add more bandwidth or drive applications in a way that brings flexibility to our customers. So that's really where our strategy comes in. Like Ronald said, when you talk about the satellite being from a modem to a teleport, how do you bring that larger picture into it? How do you take multiple systems together, bring them in to be able to provide a solution that works for that customer? It's not just about bandwidth, and it's not just about latency. It's about cost. It's about availability. It's about what the guarantees are and SLAs that go into those types of things, and picking the right solutions for our customers. And every customer is different, right? A commercial maritime customer is completely different than an energy customer, is completely different than a cruise customer. They all have different wants and needs out of it. So when we look at our strategy and taking it up a level from just the provider levels of the satellites, how do we bring them flexibility? How do we bring them adjudication of applications across the link so that they're using the bandwidth that they have available to them in the best possible way? How do we make it seamless so that as OneWeb is ramping up, we can get more OneWeb out onto our customer sites? As Rivada comes online, how do we make it easy for them to be able to integrate it? And how do we use those combined solutions to bring an even better solution to our customer over just having a single one? How do we also add value in that, right? When you look at the managed service market, I think there's been a lot of question about that. How do you bring value? And where we see that value is, we call it our Sigma product, but it's really a software-driven future, right? How do you help bring applications to the edge to enable more customer interaction? Starlink's a really simple one, right? Starlink has pay-per-use models, right? I think OneWeb has some of those too, if I'm not mistaken, Stephen. But how do you control that data usage? If you can buy a 50 gigabit package, if you just use the package and you don't put anything on it, you're going to use it in a day, maybe two, right? So you have 2 days worth of really great internet, and then the rest of the month you're waiting for your 2 days again. But if you can use something like a crew portal and you hand packages out to your crew and say, okay, I get my 100 megs a day. right? I can burn it however I want. And the next crew member gets 100 megs and so on. You can help control how much you burn, and then that controls your burn rate and how well you use it. So the ability to use software to be able to, like Ronald said, I think it was a great point. How do you extend that reach beyond just the teleport and the modem, and how do you bring that flexibility to customers? Is really kind of that growth and strategy that we see on how to bring managed services to the end user.
Thanks, Bill. I think I agree completely with both points of view. I think a combination of the two things. So from Eutelsat Group perspective, with certainly on the connectivity side, I'd say our strategy is very much focused around trust. So becoming the most trusted partner essentially for global connectivity, and that trust is rather focused on the integrator partners, the distribution partners, the service providers who are serving the end user. So we kind of think of the value proposition towards those kind of customers who are our, who we rely on to provide the ultimate value proposition to the end user. And we're very conscious of this, right? So making sure that we're still relevant and working and innovating with the industry. And I think that's a big part of our strategy in general. On the kind of connectivity level, of course, we've absorbed the OneWeb business into the overall group, and we've seen the market reaction to the LEO connectivity so far firsthand. I mean, obviously there are some services out there that have taken a massive amount of market share in a small amount of time, purely because of the LEO aspect, because of the low latency, because of the high throughput, and things like that have been mentioned already with Ronald and Will. Bringing those two things together, the legacy of GEO satellite capacity and evolving that legacy of GEO satellite capacity with the LEO constellations is something that we want to become a kind of one-stop shop for our partners to be able to trust our capability to deliver a sensible service that works across both of all of the assets that we have available to us, essentially. So I think being that kind of one-stop shop for existing partners to serve an end user with a really dynamic SATCOM solution is super important to us. But maintaining that connection with industry, innovating with partners like ST Engineering and manufacturers of antenna systems, keeping everybody relevant in the game and providing the building blocks to really a fantastic end user experience.
Thank you, Stephen. And that's a great segue into our next topic, which is the impact of LEO and NGSO constellations. So how do you assess the competitive threat of LEOs to GEOs? And to address one of the audience Q&A or questions that we have, what is the future of GEO satellites? So as TV broadcast is degrading due to the use of mobile phones and GEO communications is overwhelmed by new LEO constellations.
I mean, I can jump on that one. I think GEO for me is still super relevant, right? We've got still the vast majority of our revenue comes from the broadcast business. As that kind of growth stops on that side of the business, we've split into two different units to make up for that and to manage that gentle decline on the GEO side. So we're obviously aware of that. We're aware of the change in what was broadcast over satellite, but also you have to recognize that the video and media is data at the end of the day, and people are still consuming that kind of broadcast data, and the amount of video that goes over a connectivity service, whether it be a GEO or a LEO, is kind of equivalent. So I'd say the GEO legacy wide beam satellites in the form that they have been for the past 30 or 40 years, we don't see the renewal of those as they are today, but we see a whole lot more, right? We see just this year and next year, I think you'll see a huge amount of very high throughput satellite capacity come into the market in general across various different operators. There's still quite a lot of investment going into flexible FlexSats payloads, which allow you to really be more modular with the satellite design. So you can put a satellite up there, you can reshape the beam over a country or a continent, or in a software-defined manner. And then you can also have the flexibility to move those within the geostationary orbit, which is something that normally you don't expect on the geo side. So you put a satellite up there in a specific slot, it's expected to sit there for its 15-year lifetime. I think, in future, with that modular capability, you'll be able to move for different missions over the period of a month, a year, or whatever is relevant, depending on how the market changes. So I think the evolution on geostationary satellites is still interesting. And yeah, really for me, the combination with the LEO constellations, and how do we really operationalize the benefits of a true GEO-LEO combination, whether it's on a session basis, an application basis. Ultimately, the end user has no interest in knowing whether he's using a GEO satellite or a LEO satellite or a Wi-Fi link. They just want to get the connectivity. So if we can make that as seamless as possible, take advantage of the latency impact on LEO where we need to, where it's relevant, and save the geo capacity for the non-sensitive, non-latency sensitive applications, then I think it's only a good thing. And the more we start to offload, let's say the geo, whether it's legacy broadcast or whether it's connectivity services that are perhaps seeing a shift onto LEO, then it opens up a lot more availability on the geostationary satellites, which can also help. And in some cases, we're still limited to the amount of data you can transmit from the ground to the satellite. So geo is still pretty robust at managing that kind of upstream capability. So I don't see it disappearing. I think we look forward to the new FlexSats coming onto the market, and let's see how we combine it with the LEO connectivity.
Well, it's interesting. So first of all, kudos, because you're one of the first geostationary players that I hear saying, it might well be that we don't need geos anymore. I mean, you kind of back down on that a little bit in the end, because it's a robust platform, and I would tend to agree with that. But I have a bit of a dissenting view. I think that, as you pointed out yourself, video is now data, and data is latency sensitive. And so I think we can debate whether it's 10 years or 20 years or 50 years or whatever it is, but as latency is becoming more and more important, and it is, you'll see those satellites come down, and where you now have these big birds up there at 36,000 kilometers, and the smaller satellites down in lower orbits. I think over time that will reverse. You'll see smaller satellites in geostationary orbits. I mean, companies like Astranis, I think, are already tapping into that type of development, I would say. And it's simply a function of how the world is changing, and costs also seems to be a big driver into growth prospects and developments, where everything needs to be cheaper and cheaper. And I think that is one that we should also focus on as an industry, because I think it doesn't work. Everything has become a lot cheaper in our industry, and more people in our industry are struggling than ever before. It's not a function of cost. It is a function of a compelling application that people are prepared to pay money for. And we're coming out of an era, and Eutelsat is a great beneficiary of that. SES is, Intelsat is, where we had a fantastic, successful application, which is called direct-to-home video and direct-to-cable video. That was tremendously helpful for the build out of this industry and to become as successful as it is. And we need another application. We need another application with which the industry that we all love so much can shine. And right now, I'm coming back to in part to what I said earlier. Focusing on pure access is going to be difficult, because the moment you're being successful providing access in a successful way in an area where you're alone and where you basically have room to grow, the moment your terrestrial peers start picking up on that is when they come in and they fiber it up, they microwave it up, and then satellites struggle. We've seen it in the Middle East, we've seen it in Latin America, we've seen it in Africa, we've seen it in the whole Pacific. Those were all great countries for satellite and also for data, high latency as it was. But the moment you start building a good book of business is when business cases start to close for our terrestrial friends, and then you lose out on that. So it's not about cost, it's not about low price. It is about horses for courses, and it is about a application that we need to develop as an industry that is compelling, that could be high price, because being in space at the end of the day is still expensive. But once it does deliver a unique value to the end customer, one that he cannot get from a terrestrial equivalent or other satellite systems, that is when you're on a good track. And then you can do away with discussions of, okay, so we have geostationary systems. We're still deriving a lot of good money from that, from our successful video days, and we're slowly making the transition, and multi-orbit strategies come in play and all that jazz. No, I think it is really about trying to find our next DTH success, whatever that may be. I mean, we at Rivada think we found something that's going to be successful. We're seeing a lot of traction. But I think that is the challenge for each and every satellite operator, vendor in this industry, and is to collectively work towards that new DTH type application that was very helpful in building our industry, and build an ecosystem in which we all dearly love and enjoy working in.
Yep, I think it's very fair points. I would say that, yeah, I think the relevance is still there. I believe that yes, there's definitely room to find a new innovative application that can be less latency sensitive. But
Yeah.
Again, there's this combination of the two things, which I think is not to be generally overlooked, and the flexibility in covering a broad area of the earth is something that is still quite a value proposition, and which you simply, on a single asset, it's kind of combined with the LEO constellation, I think is a real value proposition. I'll just take one of the questions on the screen live as I see it. That you mentioned the market reaction to LEO. I mentioned, so what specifically is the market reaction to OneWeb with Eutelsat Geo? So the market reaction to OneWeb, the reaction to the introduction of the OneWeb constellation and the early adoption of it is quite astounding. I think the biggest complaints come at, how can we accelerate the complete readiness for all of the verticals in a total global condition? At this stage, we're going to have that in place this year. The demand for it is huge. We're seeing the backlog increase rapidly, and we just want to be able to get it completely globally covered and rolled out. But there's a lot of moving parts to it, and we're making fantastic progress to be ready with a global service by the middle of the year.
Thank you, Stephen. So before we move on, just a reminder to audience members that you may ask questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And we'll pivot over a little bit towards multi-orbit strategies and the demand for multi-orbit strategies, which has significantly increased to take advantage of the different orbits. So the next question is, where do you see the most significant growth opportunities for multi-orbit strategies, for multi-orbit satellite services in the next 5 to 10 years? And what are the key benefits and challenges versus mono-orbit? Maybe we can start with you, Cynthia, and specifically to address one of the audience questions is, what are those standards that iDirect is or will support to encourage multi-orbit integration?
Thank you. So very much to add on to the previous discussion, as the technology provider for the ground infrastructure for those here on the panel, as well as all of our other customers, we firmly believe there is a place for both GEO and NGSO constellations. And there will always be certain use cases that are more applicable to GEO, and to others that'll naturally be more LEO or MEO centric. We do see interest from customers in all orbits. And I think the most interesting technology challenge that we all have is the ability to maximize the most appropriate orbit, not only for quality of service, but also in a cost-effective manner. As a service provider, there's SLAs that are required to meet. And again, our customers are looking towards us and our platforms to assist them in making that optimal decision by application, by usage model. So we do see growth coming in many of our key verticals, whether it's in-flight connectivity, cruise. Again, it will come down to what that specific customer of ours, what their service offering is, how they differentiate that service offering in the market as to which orbit may be most appropriate. To get to the question that was written in, it's interesting because there are not yet industry standards developed in order to facilitate that multi-orbit roaming and or switching. So we are participating in a number of standards organizations, whether they be Diffie to promote digitization, 3GPP to promote the integration with 5G, most recently the WAVE Consortium. We are always looking for consensus, and as an organization, we're very pragmatic in appreciating the need for those standards in order to, again, help our customers, which is to facilitate the most cost-effective delivery of their service that they intend to bring to market.
Thank you, Cynthia. Will, did you want to add in on that?
Yeah, I think I can add in on quite a few of these, because I think they're pretty similar, right? The impact of NGSOs and our multi-orbit strategy. I want to go back to something Stephen said. Stephen, I think you had said at one point that you felt like users just wanted connectivity and they didn't really care about too much else. And I think what we're seeing is kind of some of that, but they're very sensitive to latency too, like Ronald said. The ability to have that low latency that OneWeb offers, that Rivada can offer, I think really does help enable a lot of applications in that at user experience, which ties into we're seeing more market share because of things like Starlink. Starlink comes in with a really good service, low latency, high bandwidth at a low price, and it's really expanded market share. And like Ronald said, we're all satellite people. We're all excited to see the proliferation of space as part of it. And I think that adds to how we build these multi-orbit strategies. Like Steve said, we see in real time the requirements to have GEO and LEO together, right? LEO is still not enough bandwidth for everyone. You still need GEO for some things. Being able to application route so that you have some things going over one GEO versus going over a LEO, or the ability to add multiple LEOs together and then start to put those together, I think really does make a big difference on it. The thing that we see is more vertical integration of the two, and I think that kind of ties to the standard, Cynthia, as well. Starlink's vertically integrated. They have their own flat panel, their own modem. OneWeb has type approved hardware and their own modem that goes along with it. It's a closed system. I'd be interested to hear from Ronald on Rivada Space's take on it, but I think we kind of see that trend, and that trend drives kind of standards within those vertical provided solutions. So Starlink has its own standard, OneWeb has its own standard, Rivada will probably have its own standard. but they don't really affect anyone else. So we don't have to worry about switching between them. It puts it on us to be able to figure out how do you switch between, you could think of it in terms of home internet. You have your home internet and you have LTE as a failover. How do you help switch that seamlessly? And that's where, even some on this call, I think, have participated with SD-WAN and how you can use SD-WAN as a value add service to help, at least with some of that, providing that multi-orbit strategy, as well as gain market share and enable those two things on the edge. So I think that's a big part of that strategy, to be able to have the flexibility to, as you're moving through the market, as the shift is coming through, be able to leverage geo as it makes sense. I think long term we'll see geo becoming more available to customers, and it may present a more attractive opportunity to put, bandwidth that you're not worried about the latency, put applications over that type of bandwidth and make better use of the geo. So you're really trying to take everything that's available to the users and combine it in the best way and take the most advantage of it. So these assets aren't going away. The geo satellites that are in orbit aren't going to disappear. They still have useful life. They still have value. Steve, I think you said it too, just to kind of bring something back from what you said, was we may not replace them in the long term, but they're still there, right? And they still have capacity, and it still needs to be used and utilized. And we want to be able to utilize that for its life. So I think that helps transition how this industry will look over in the 5, 10, 20-year time frame.
Yeah, so Will, there was a question coming in from me from Bruce Albert. So I was reading that right in the middle when you were saying I'm interested in hearing from Ron what he has to say about that. And so I'm drawing a blank on what it was that you were interested in hearing about. So could you repeat that again? My apologies.
We're seeing Starlink verticalized, their own antennas, right, their own flat panels, their own modems. We're seeing OneWeb with type-approved terminals, but they have their own modem, their own closed system. And it would be interesting to understand if Rivada is looking at something similar. Are you going to be a verticalized solution? Are you going to be, agnostic to hardware providers and, be a bit more open?
Yeah, well, it's going to be that. So we're definitely going to be looking at the type approval type approach that is also characterizing OneWeb. It's also because we're a very different system from Starlink. I mean, we love them to death. They're trailblazing a lot of the stuff that we now do not have to do anymore. But they are a access provider. I've used that word more before, and so they can afford to be a closed system, whereas we are more of really a network provider. And so depending on where you want to terminate your network, be it on a plane in the middle of the desert on the North Pole or just on a big office building, you have different needs for different types of antennas. And so to develop all those of our own on our own and stock them and ship them, that's not going to be part of our business model. So type approval is going to be the name of the game. As for that question that Bruce put out there, can we do direct connectivity rooftop to rooftop? Yes, that's very much true. The plan is to indeed put a terrestrial network in space, basically. And once you're connected from your rooftop to one of these birds, you basically have access to the entire constellation. And now you're allowed to terminate your circuit anywhere on the world, be it North Pole or the South Pole or any point in between. It can also be a plane, it can be a ship, it can be whatever it needs to be. As for the 300, which was mentioned, I'm not quite sure if I understand your question correctly. But in order to get global coverage, you need a minimum of somewhere between 125 and 150 satellites. And if you want to start adding, this is LEO that we're talking, right? And we're at 1,000 kilometers altitude. And if you want to add some serious redundancy, also for places like Singapore, that is, of course, very well known for its torrential rain and adverse weather, where you need to have multiple satellites in view, you then need to go beyond that 125 to 150 to 300 to get that redundancy in space, such that if one satellite is not or is blocked by weather or whatever, you have alternative satellites in view. And so that's where the 300 is coming from. If you go lower, That's of course interesting because when we talk latency, we talk end-to-end latency. It's not just up and down the satellite, which most people are doing, of course. If you go lower, that's interesting, of course, because then you have lower latency, but now you also need to add satellites to kind of, get the world covered, because as you go lower, of course, you see less of Earth, and when you see less, you need more satellites. And that comes with a challenge, because now you have so many satellites that if you want to go from the one to the other to the next and so on and so forth, you add latency per satellite. And now your compelling latency story goes away very, very quickly, for starters. And second, because these satellites are lower, they also tend to be smaller. And now the capacity also goes down, and outfitting them with 4 lasers becomes more of a challenge in lower orbits, because, again, they're typically smaller and they have less power. So lower means lower up and down latency, but end-to-end latency, it may be a lot more, and the capacity is certainly less. If you go higher, then of course, you have your latency working against you. So what I'm getting towards is there is like an ideal altitude in terms of putting a terrestrial network in space. And we believe we found that at like 1,000, because now you don't have so many satellites that your latency story, end-to-end latency story, I should say, is not working anymore. Sorry, where was yeah, so you're high enough to have a good latency story. You're low enough to have enough capacity. Sorry, you're low enough to have blah. You're low enough to have a good latency characteristics, and you're high enough to have bigger birds that provide you with enough capacity. And so that's what we refer to as the Goldilocks zone, and we believe we're in there. So those are the 2 immediate questions answered.
Thank you, Ronald. And just kind of coming back to Starlink and our conversation surrounding that. So with hyperscale disruptors like Starlink, how can your organizations drive efficiencies and automation when providing services to compete against them? Maybe Stephen, you want to start us off with that one?
Yeah, so Starlink's been great in proving that everybody loves LEO, so we're doing exactly the same in terms of that, with the OneWeb constellation, to make sure that we are trying to be as efficient as possible. When it comes to the whole vertical integration thing, obviously there are some benefits to be had there, but it's not the choice that we take. So we innovate together with the industry, and when it comes to getting the price points, LEO in itself brings the capability to be more efficient on the sort of connectivity side of things, on the megabits pricing, let's say. And then there's some where obviously that we need to be able to connect to the systems, and that is something that we continually strive to improve, and to make sure that we can sort of subsidize these offerings with our partners to try and drive those efficiencies. But I think working with many different partners, allowing them to innovate on that level, also drives quite a lot of competition, and so that can help with the end user cost, let's say.
So Eugen asked a very interesting question. As satellite connectivity turns into a commodity and SD-WAN is standard office IT service, where does that leave the satellite service provider? So this is exactly what I was talking about earlier when I talked about, we have to find something unique in space as a satellite industry. Again, we believe we've done that with Rivada. I encourage everybody to do that, because this is what it's about. So yes, SD-WAN is a very important technology, because it allows enterprises to put their traffic on their network of choice, depending on the application, depending on the data and the security profiles that's associated with it. And this is one of our big topics that we have in our discussions with resellers and end users, particularly enterprises, when they are worried about where they have landed. Because where they've landed is They have done away with a lot of leased lines. They've done away with expensive terrestrial infrastructure because the internet was so cheap. They bought a bunch of broadband modems. It's true for enterprises. It's true also for shops in the street where you and I go and shop. It's true for remote areas. It's true for remote offices. They have a opportunity. They have tapped into an opportunity to cut their costs by doing away with expensive infrastructure and use broadband. And now they have a problem because now they have a higher security exposure than they had ever before. They've saved up a lot of money, but they have a higher exposure there. And to now have an option through SD-WAN to put their secure traffic on a more secure network. In the case of Rivada, that will be our network. And make that SD-WAN infrastructure platform make the decisions to put it either on the cheap internet or on a more expensive secure network is within reach. And because it's in reach, that creates for us at least an opportunity to come in and say, if we can take 3, 4, 5% of your traffic that you want to keep secure, then by all means, keep that 95% on cheap internet access, and we'll carry that traffic that's really near and dear to you in a very different infrastructure. Now you can immediately see that the discussions that we're having are not so much about you're offering me 300, but it needs to be 200. Our discussions are more about, can you really guarantee my data is safe? And what price do you put on that? I mean, if you can convince a CIO that he can go to bed at night and sleep comfortably knowing that his data is secure, then you get away from these discussions that it needs to be below X or otherwise X price, because otherwise we cannot do a deal. And this is what I mean with, we need to find, this is one of them, but there are potentially more, but we need to find applications where we can leverage the great asset that we have in space, because some things are just better solved in space than they are terrestrially. And if we can leverage that, then I think we're on a path towards, being successful, not just as a company in the case of Rivada, but as an industry. And so that question is key, because that indicates that there is that opportunity. And let me assure you, it's a much better discussion to talk about security and the value of that than it is to have a discussion around, you're offering 300 and your competitor is offering 250, so can you get me cheaper? I'm not saying you don't ever have to do that again, but it is definitely a similar situation to where we were with DTH back in the day.
I just add that I guess when it comes to the service provider question and is that still relevant, I think it depends on your market a little bit. I spoke earlier about,
it does, certainly,
maybe with a mobility focus, where I think there's still a huge amount of value add, whether it's ensuring that security aspect and managing the SD-WAN thing in partnership with the network provider, because it's all very well having the SD-WAN, but if you're only mitigating a problem, you're switching one thing to the other for either a least cost reason or a network congestion reason or something like that. But the way I look at it, if there's a feedback, and as a satellite operator, the software defined satellites, we can do something about any issue that's there. If we get an unknown demand that's exceeding the availability on any given link, how do we actually deal with that in real time? And that's the kind of power that we expect with the next generation of LEO and GEO satellites. So I think that's an interesting point. And on the enterprise business, yeah, for sure, telcos and that's a huge focus for our business, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
But I think
I would agree. I would agree. I think that especially as some of the additional 3GPP releases incorporate more NTN capabilities and those actually get finalized, I think we will see another surge of entrance into our space industry. I think it will come from the telco. I think for the first time there will be the ability to interoperate, and it will just drive more participants to our industry.
Yeah, I think
Would that be
especially
great?
as you,
Because the telcos have always been a big competitor, right? I mean,
Mhm.
we came in with satellite. We built a business, connected people, and then before you know it, they were competing and you were thrown out. And now I think if we do it right, if we really provide services that are unique, that are compelling, that are adding value to what the telcos can do, then they can be our greatest partner.
I think they can as
And
well.
they have more touch points with businesses and
Mhm.
consumers than we can ever wish for. So if we get them on our side by being able to have them resell or integrate something that's truly unique and valuable, that is a great future.
I think that ties into the next question, right? Where you have the MNOs, right? What does it mean with MNOs? And as the satellites progress more to a mobile handset, I think that'll further drive those interactions, right? And I don't think it's far away, right? We've seen AST, we've seen Starlink both connect to cell phone handsets,
Mhm.
and that is just going to force the hand of terrestrial operators to try to integrate more. The same with SD-WAN. While we all talk about SD-WAN like it's old hat, the reality is it's a very capable software that is extremely complex, and it's
Mhm.
not to the point where you can just plug and play it for everything, right? You can do some simple things like some softwares you just plug in and they fail over, but there's so much more that you can do with it. There's so much more value that can be had out of it, and how you integrate that with terrestrial, I think, is important. And I think that can help be one of the things that we bring to terrestrial networks. Like, they get something from us as part of this, is how do we help them provide a better service to their customers by bringing all these great technologies that we've developed on this side to their end users and make them in a simple way.
Yes, certainly. And I think also just if any of the panelists want to address another question tied into the same topic on what is important to focus on in terms of the commercial and technical areas in relation to partnering with MNOs.
I mean, from a technical perspective, I think the interaction's already there, right? We're already seeing 4G LTE waveform adoptions into the networks. We're seeing satellites deployed with it running right now. 5G is only a matter of time before we get it. I think the challenge is the aperture size, right? You need a bigger aperture to be able to talk to a smaller handset, but they're also overcoming those issues. So I think the reality of it's going to be more commercial and regulatory than anything else. SpaceX trial in the US was stopped by the FCC, not by SpaceX, right? So it's capable of doing it, but how do you get through the regulatory hurdles? How do you get through the operators, the license bans? How do you work through the commercial problems with that challenge? So, in my mind, I think we can do it. I think it's just a matter of time. It's going to be more on the commercial side to understand how do AT&T and the T-Mobiles of the world want to be able to integrate a cell tower in space. There's so much value of it, but how do you do it?
And I think I agree, Will. I think there's a technology wave that will need to take place before the direct to device is capable of doing more than just basic SOS messaging, right? When we think of what the current terminal at an endpoint looks like in a SATCOM terminal, it's dramatically different than a handset that we all carry around in our pockets. So I think that's a ways away from a practical use case for a B2B environment. I do think, however, there are, again, applications, whether it's connected car, where having more of that integrated interoperability, and again, how you interoperate depends dramatically upon what those two networks look like and what type of interaction you want the endpoint to have, what type of interworking function you need to utilize coming into that 5G core. I think that's a little shorter term. Again, as some of those standards are finalized, I think we will see tremendous interest not only on the SATCOM side, but from that MNO world to want to now be able to enter adjacent markets and have that add-on service of what happens when you roam outside, your typical terrestrial network.
Thank you, Cynthia. And as we approach the end of the hour, I'll address one of the last questions that we've received. So with regards to satellite affordability, so what are your various companies doing to promote the notion of affordability for satellite services to drive global growth?
For me, it's not all
Well-
it's not all about cost. So we're an enterprise grade connectivity provider. So definitely, it's not the only measure for us. I think there's a lot of value in the combination of the indirect go-to-market that we adopt. Certainly, I think there's a lot of value in maintaining a solid, deliverable, strong SLA, large workforce to support a service, to have customer service engineers and people looking after each and individual enterprise customer. So, yeah, cost is super important to everybody. I think we all see it coming down. We all see the cost of satellite connectivity coming down via the emerging markets, the new technologies, the innovations that we've been doing. So I think all of us can say we're all innovating, and there is no other option than to deliver a lower cost over time. The price of the same megabit of service is not going up, let's say. So I think we already see it. If we're not seeing it already today, I'd be quite surprised. I think it's a huge difference from 10 years ago in our industry, the cost of delivering such a service like we do today.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And so there's a great saying that is, in order to do good, you have to do well. So certainly from a Rivada point of view, we plan on, as was mentioned before, to focus on enterprise and government. And if it comes about, providing affordable services, then I'm thinking of providing those services for those that are in need. And I think it should not so much be about affordability there. It should be about having the ability as a company to do the right thing if you have something that can be of value to the people that you're trying to protect, to help, to whatever's needed at such point. So I think that for me is affordability. And so for me that almost falls in the category of corporate social responsibility. So affordability as such is not a goal. Doing the right thing is. And that starts with making sure that you run a profitable business. And the only way you run a profitable business is when you have something of value that solves a real problem to companies who have the budgets to get those problems solved. And that's where you should start. And that allows you to do good. And yeah, I think that's what we try to propagate as a responsibility for everybody in the industry, because we're in space, we can cover a lot of ground, literally, and so we have a responsibility there.
But I think it kind of ties to what we're seeing, right? Starlink is opening up market share to everyone, right? We're just seeing the value of having it in all these different places. I think, like Steve said, we're going to naturally see that reduction in cost, and we're going to increase the number of people that leverage satellite on a daily basis. I think it's a great thing to see. And I mean, to more directly answer the question, I think you're certainly going to see those costs come down. I think you're going to see market share continue to increase, and we'll reach more people than we ever have with satellite.
Mm-hmm. And our take on it might be a little different, just because we are the ones providing the actual infrastructure to all of the service providers. We are working very closely with a number of customers in order to optimize what is that equipment, either right at the teleport gateway side or the endpoint. In our industry, there has been many rounds of, is a universal CPE, customer premise equipment, possible? There's so many advantages as we collectively think about how to deliver services at a more affordable rate, such to increase the addressable market. But it all starts with everyone's willingness to participate and find the most optimal solution. So we look at it as, again, the development of the standards such that you can deliver applications, again, whether it's on the hub side or remote modem side, as cost effective as possible, so that it allows you to have a greater reach into the market. New verticals, new use cases.
Thank you, Cynthia. And Will, if you want to add in anything before we close off? You're good. Awesome. So this brings us to the end of our session today. Thank you for joining us for an insightful discussion on satellite communications. The questions we did not manage to answer during the live program will be responded to in writing and posted next to the video on the GSO website if they are relevant to today's topic. Please mark your calendars for the next online discussion, The Way Forward, Satellite and Cellular Convergence, scheduled for Wednesday, March 27th at 3 p.m. UK time or 10 a.m. Eastern time. Please note not the usual Thursday because of the Easter break, but Wednesday. And registration is now open. You can find the link in your chat box. Don't forget to catch up on past webinars and stay updated with upcoming sessions by visiting GSO's YouTube channel and website, gsosatellite.com. And last but not least, thank you to our panelists for sharing your valuable insights and to our audience for contributing thought-provoking questions, making today's session truly engaging. I wish you all a wonderful day ahead, wherever you may be.